Airing on Asheville FM in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcasts and podcast emanating out of occupied Chalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world, and you can find our archives, transcripts, ways to follow us and support us at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. This week we spoke with Donna Mae, a longtime resident of Minneapolis and registered nurse working mostly with people who are unsheltered and use injection drugs. Donna lives in a neighborhood of the city that has had heavy ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol activity, and speaks for the hour about the last 2 months of invasion, organizing with neighbors, the legacy of the George Floyd Uprising, and aftermath of the murders of Renée and Alex Pretti, as well as the recent general strike and lessons for preparing for the next incursion, wherever that may be. Also, just a note for listeners, recently armed conflict has flared up between the Syrian Democratic Forces and both the Turkish-backed so-called Syrian National Army militia and the forces aligned with the Syrian transitional government. In coming days, we'll be sharing a timely podcast featuring an interview with a member of Tekoşîna Anarşîst and another with a Western activist on the ground in Qamişlo to share their perspectives on the situation and updates on the changing terrain. We talk about the danger of a resurgence of ISIS, the humanitarian crisis growing due to the siege of Kobane and fears of renewed patriarchal governance, but also about organizing and international solidarity. So we suggest you keep an eye out for that. We'll update the show notes once we have that ready for listeners.
Hi, my name is Donna Mae. I'm a registered nurse here in Minneapolis. I work mostly with people who are unsheltered and use injection drugs. That's my kind of background. I have some history in street medicine and have lived in Minneapolis for the last 17 years solid. Actually, the last 19 years, and grew up in Minnesota. And I think that's what people need to know about me.
Obviously, for anyone listening audience, unless you're living under a rock, you're aware that there's been an increased federal assault on the residents of Minneapolis. At the vanguard is the CBP and Customs and Border Patrol, as well as Immigration Customs Enforcement officers, and I'm sure a slew of other federal agents. And my understanding is that this onslaught was argued to be about focusing on, I think, Somali immigrant communities. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the part of town where immigration enforcement has been focused on and sort of how people have been responding in those communities, like just sort of like geographically focusing ourselves on what part of town that's happening in.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about the part of town that I live in, and I can talk about the part of town that I work in, which is only about a mile from each other. But I live equidistant between where George Floyd was murdered in 2020 and where Renée was murdered this month. And so my house is probably about 3 or 4 blocks between each of those sites. And I live on a busy one-way street. It has a lot of traffic that goes downtown Minneapolis. And the street that Renée was murdered on is the one way in the opposite direction, going outside of town. I say that to just describe that there are some specific routes that feel like have been more heavily present with ICE. My block in particular has had several times where large convoys have arrived in order to do under the auspices of enforcing immigration policy. The neighborhood that I live in is largely residential. It's a part of town that when I moved into the area in 2006, it was one of the most integrated neighborhoods in Minneapolis. And so we have an equal number of like Latinx, African American and African born, and then Caucasian folks that live in the neighborhood. And I would say in the last 5 years, even since George was murdered, there's been a lot more affluence that's come into this part of the city. And then we also have like long-term residents that have, like different, I would say that these are the folks who are being targeted the most through immigration, who have long-standing homes, long-standing leases, have been in the community for as long as I've been here. Sure, there's been some turnover, but there's really a strong community here of people that have been around and have made this place home for a long time. So that's like where I wake up and go to sleep. And then my work is largely in the Phillips neighborhood. And that neighborhood is on a cultural corridor for our native folks. We have a higher incidence of unsheltered homelessness there. And it's a really like resource rich as far as like healthcare and social services, but also where there's definitely some of the highest need. And that area also has a pretty high concentration for families that would be vulnerable for ICE and, like these different enforcement federal agents that are coming into town. There are other parts of town that I know are also being more heavily, like ICE is everywhere. There are definitely corridors or places that they seem to be coming back to more often. And I don't know as much about those areas because I've really been trying to stick on my block and then in the places where I work and have like longstanding relationships. You kind of brought up the question about Minnesota being a place where immigration enforcement was going to start because of fraud and because that fraud was linked to, some ideas about racialized or, specific to our Somali community. And we do have the largest Somali community outside of Somalia, and it's a large population here in the Twin Cities. It does seem like that was the narrative that in somehow responding to the incidents of Somali organizations that were associated with this fraud. There's so much misinformation about that, and I am not the one to speak directly to it except to know that, the numbers that are being reported are nonsensical. The, scale of it really is, and I'm not trying to make any excuses for fraud happening. As somebody who works in homeless services, I've definitely seen misuse of, Medicare dollars that are going to provide housing support and case management to people. So not trying to downplay, absolve anyone from fraud. And also recognizing that Minnesota is just in general one of the more robust social service, and we have our expanded Medicare. We provide a broader base of supports and services for our people that are here, the residents of Minnesota. And so I also just hesitate to equate fraud with, at the scale of how it's being talked about, with what is actually happening here in Minneapolis.
I think anyone who's paying attention or knows the United States well enough will recognize that while the right-wing talking points might be about fraud and make it seem like, it's a reasonable law and order type issue, at the other side of the mouth of the same politicians and the same police is racialized accusations of corruption. Even if fraud were occurring for social service needs, then I think that the approach and the targeting of boots on doors and, pulling children out of schools and stuff is clearly out of a reasonable range of addressing minor corruption levels.
Well, and I'm not someone that has access to this information, but I don't think it would be too hard to understand who it is that they're investigating for the fraud and whether or not those people are even at risk for immigration would be a very big surprise to me. I mean, our community here is longstanding and generational that have lived here in Minneapolis. Absolutely, there's new people arriving and we continue to welcome people in from different places. But I think even equating fraud with a longstanding population here in Minneapolis as something being about immigration is also a distortion.
I guess what I was getting at is that I think that there's logical jumps that the administration and Stephen Miller and company are doing to equate corruption with immigration status with skin color and the concept of belonging or not belonging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's much more about how do we identify a community as the other and then make them into a sort of scary being in the imaginary of white suburbanites, and then how do we criminalize and export, or incarcerate or whatever. But yeah, not trying to tell you what's going on the ground, but it seems not disconnected from all of Trump's language about garbage countries and garbage people and whatever all the rhetoric that he's been spitting for quite a while now between the two administrations. I wonder if you could talk about your neighborhood specifically that's had these two notable police murders. 2020, George Floyd was murdered and a collective mourning space was opened up and held. And I'm curious about how that memory, not just the police murder of Miss Good, but also, like, this isn't just about the two people that have been like shot on film just recently. The reaction is about our neighborhoods being invaded, our neighbors being kidnapped, kids being taken out of school. And I wonder about like the culture that was built up around 2020 and the memories and skills that people developed, the ways of relating to neighbors, and how that sort of transformed into community patrols and mutual aid and care that's going on in the neighborhood under this current incursion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a pretty big question, or pretty broad, but I can try to take a stab at it.
Okay.
Yeah, Minneapolis has a long-standing history of police brutality. Though we have like a large social service net and we have really good healthcare, we have some of the most abysmal, like, racialized outcomes and disparities. So though we have supports and services, they are not equitable across everybody in our community. As someone who works specifically with people who sleep outside, and there's some very racialized aspects to that, it is for my body, and I'm an outlier. I don't know what it would sound like to talk to my other neighbors. It was not a surprise to me that the police were violent. It was, I think, significant that that was filmed, and I think it was a surprise to people across the community. It probably is more significant that it happened in a part of town that's less common. It probably is also like a little bit a part of how things are going down with using CBP and ICE. Like, that acronym is new to me, but I can like understand that. Like, I think what was so stunning about the footage when Derek Chauvin was on top of George Floyd is that there were people around saying stop. There were people around that were recording, and that violence continued, and that ended that man's life. And that's the same kind of like experience that people are having with all of the brutality that, you know, these agents are bringing into my community, and was very much a part of both Renée Good and Alex Pretti's death. And I think that it is really shocking as a person in the United States to see that this is witnessed by people is different, and that it's happening in places where people are living, and people are feeling, you know, that this shouldn't be happening, and this shouldn't be happening here. And maybe that's a little part of like what ties the thread together between those stories, but really trying to be clear as well that like the long-standing history of state violence is present here in Minneapolis. I bought my house in 2006. We had the highest amount of vacancies of any neighborhood in the city. There were houses that were like vacant and foreclosed for years. It was a time where like people were incentivized to move into this part of town and stay in this part of town. And that's like a totally different landscape than the housing situation here. Our housing situation is totally different. The economy of the city is totally different, as well as just like the rate at which our city is being developed by, you know, all of these different future speculative, you know, development kind of mentality. And all of that has made the city less livable for so many people in the last 5 years, but for sure in the last 15 years. So thinking about that, like, I can't think about like the way in which state violence is playing out in the city without, you know, like some of the context of that. Like, Minneapolis is seeing what some of the larger cities have dealt with before, and that's like in real time right now. I haven't really sat with the difference between what it feels like in my body to have watched the murder of George Floyd and the murder of Renée Good and the murder of Alex Pretti, knowing that these are all, I think, moments in the U.S. history that are galvanizing people, not just here in my city, but across the nation and potentially even across the world. Like, it is very striking to see the way these deaths have gone down, the way these murders have happened.
The Final Straw Radio is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Welcome to Propaganda by the Seed, a podcast about plants and the nerds that love them. We alternate between hour-long interview episodes that usually focus on a single species or crop, and shorter episodes that focus on topics related to plants like grafting, composting, and the rest. You can find Propaganda by the Seed on the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts at propagandabytheseed.com or most podcast platforms. I'll see you deep in the weeds.
If you want to support The Final Straw Radio, you can subscribe to our podcast via various streaming platforms, follow, rate, and share our materials online, and learn more at tfsr.media. And if you'd like to fund our transcription work that allows for easier translation, more accessibility of content, and the zines that we produce for each interview, consider picking up some merch from us or making a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal, Stripe, Venmo, or LibrePay. Or joining our Patreon to access early release content and other goodies via the links that you can find at tfsr.media/support. Finally, if you'd like to hear us on your local radio station, visit tfsr.media/radio to find more info or reach out to us for some help. Thanks for listening. I think that you hit on a thing, though, that's really striking that I haven't heard other people talk about, which is that people with George Floyd's murder, there was this 9 minutes or something of people standing around saying, stop it, get off, but not doing the intervention thing. And I feel like one of the things that is really inspiring for people on the outside is seeing people in Minneapolis and seeing people in other cities too, but Minneapolis at the moment where Border Patrol and ICE are going stupid hard, is that people are not just standing by and people are intervening. And I know that is also puts people, especially when these federal law enforcement have been told, oh no, don't worry, you've got immunity from whatever you do. This has caused them to react in much more violently during these interventions. With Alex Pretti's death, my understanding was that he was intervening to help to keep another person there safe when the police decided to attack him and focus their violence on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this situation with George Floyd, allegedly there was a counterfeit $20 bill. And then all of this story kind of spun around that. But, there is this kind of general understanding that if the police were intervening with a person, that they have done something fundamentally wrong. And so there is also that element to the murder of George Floyd where it's well, police are the experts, they know what they're doing. But in this instance, the people around were holy cow, don't do that. Don't hurt him. Don't kneel on his neck to death. Don't do that. And somebody from the fire department was there. Somebody, a young child was there, a middle schooler. That's who was responding. Again, it's these people in community saying, stop. I don't think at that time we had an understanding that we could actually intervene, and it wouldn't have been safe to intervene, that kind of thing. And I don't know how that translates 5 years later when this person is hey, the way ICE is enforcing things right now is chaotic. We don't even understand who's at risk for immigration. They're haphazardly taking people out of vehicles or taking people from their houses. And it's not just people who are assumedly at risk for deportation. These are people who are here on asylum, who are in the legal process for, their citizenship, people who we have not named as at risk for deportation or at risk for immigration enforcement. We also know at that time there was a lot of brutality that was happening. It was happening around schools. It was happening around churches. It's happening in our community. That is absurd that that's happening. And then there also is underneath that, maybe a difference in the understanding of these people who are being supported by our institutions and our government and everything like that. There's maybe a little bit more of a general understanding that they don't know what they're doing and they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And that people who are having an impact from them are not necessarily people who we would say are doing something wrong. And I think it becomes this moral question around that for Renée Good. Should she have been living her life that day and, coming across ICE agents and having an interaction and then, how it resulted, kind of similar with Alex Pretti, should he have been there? But in all of these things, I think there is this difference in the sense of the understanding of Minneapolis police generally know what they're doing. I don't think there's that same kind of trusted understanding or assumption about CBP and Border Patrol and the way they're behaving in our community right now. And that is, I think there's so much gray area and it's so arbitrary. And you don't know what the difference is between talking to one agent and another agent, or it's so dependent on the mood and the situation and how many vehicles are within a certain area. And, are they going to deploy tear gas or are they going to use bear spray? Are they going to use pepper balls or, what are they going to do? I have talked a little bit to friends about this who, like myself, like work a lot with emergency, like first responders. When I am in the community and there is a situation that needs a response, when fire comes, like they have their tools. They can put out a fire. They also can respond and like help save a life, reverse an overdose, like have these ways of de-escalating, can make a safe scene. When emergency medical services like an ambulance comes, they can do a lot of things. They can put someone on a transportation hold and like bring them to the hospital. They can medicate somebody either like by their will or against their will. They can, like they have tools at their disposal for a situation that needs some sort of resolve. And if police come, similarly, they can give someone a ticket, they can arrest someone, they can de-escalate a situation, they can also put someone on a hold and send them to the hospital, they can bring them to jail. And then beyond that, they have all of these tools of use of force. They have the tasers and they have spray and then they have lethal weapons. From my perspective, Border Patrol has no tools until the tools are way over the top. Like when they're deploying, I don't even know what we call it, pepper spray, but at such close range, like into people's eyes. They're using tear gas in, next to preschools. They're shooting the pellet ball things that like go up in smoke at people's feet. It's like all of those things are unheard of in an American city towards civilians who are literally standing there blowing a whistle. Like that makes no sense. And that makes no sense, like as far as like that makes no sense, like everyone understands that that shouldn't be happening. Like the consequence for blowing a whistle should not be having tear gas sprayed in my eyes at point blank range by an armed Border Patrol officer. Like that's just so absurd. And I just was in a room today full of people and asked, there was probably 60, 65 people there. Like how many people have not interacted with ICE agents that are in town? And it was maybe maybe five people had not encountered that. And that's huge to me. And this is not people who are seeking that out. It's like we're seeing that on going about our day. We're going to encounter, whether it's them in a vehicle or them in our community, them pulling people from vehicles, them pulling people from their homes, that amount of people in this short amount of time. Like you said, I think it's day 59 of what they're considering like this current occupation. And we know that there were agents here before that. And we know that, police violence or state level brutality has been happening even before that. But like this level of interaction has been happening for about 60 days. And that 60 of the 65 people have interacted with ICE. Like that is also, I think, pretty stark. Like I don't think that many people would have raised their hand if we were asking if they've had an interaction with Minneapolis Police Department in the last 60 days. And this is in a community that I was with, the room was full of people who are unsheltered and who experience street homelessness and who come together every month to talk about like what displacement has looked like in the community. That's been a longer standing conversation and some of what we've been, like coming to understand as a group of people that are coming to these meetings once a month. And so to have that be the conversation that we've been having for the last 2 years and have this conversation today, it was quite different. The last time we were together was just before the holidays. I think it was like December 18th. And so we were talking about what has changed from December 18th to January 29th. And it's a lot of things have changed in our community.
Are most of these people having interactions with ICE where ICE is coming and asking them for paperwork or questioning them or holding them, detaining them? Or is it mostly just like because they're just on the street when people are walking by or like going to the jobs or
they're seeing
school?
Neighbors that are being abducted. I mean, it's happening so often and so fast. You might be walking through an alley and then you might encounter that. You might be driving by in the bus and you might see somebody having it happen. I mean, it is so often and so visible. There's no strategy to it. It's like, I don't know, on my block, a man pulls up in front of the house. Then like what happens is it's like 4 of these huge ICE vehicles block him in. 20 agents get out of the car and like it's me and like 8 neighbors blowing whistles. They take the man, the 2 women and the babies are able to like run back to safety. All of traffic is stopped on this big one-way going into town. It's just a huge spectacle. It's like nothing's wrong with the man pulling up and like opening the car door. But then if you're surrounded by these 4 vehicles and all these people in tactical gear get out and start like scuffling with this dude and, like terrorizing everybody, they already have the adversary, like, you shouldn't be here. You don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, well, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know this person's immigration status. They're just like targeting this dude in his car because he's brown. Yeah, it's just, that's so disorienting, like, and unheard of for the people that live in my neighborhood, that they're like, that can't keep happening. And, I think the block that I live on and the adjacent blocks, I think since Renée died here, we've probably had 15 of those like big, or actually that one's not one of the bigger ones. Like that experience, we probably had 15 of those over the last, couple of weeks. And then sometimes it's even bigger than that. I'm just a few blocks from where the woman was detained from her car who, was saying like, hey, I need accommodation. And then tear gas and like a whole bunch of canisters were deployed. And, the snow is still green there. I mean, that's just on the next block for me. The dad and the 2-year-old that were in Texas within like 3 hours of being detained. That's, like the block kitty corner from me. There's been like 3 more abduction attempts in this area just within the last like 2 days. There was another huge event where they shut down all streets within, like a 5-block area and just like made this huge corridor. It all abuts against like the memorial for Renée. Yeah, it's crazy making. And there's no indication that that's going to slow down. And there's no indication that there's any other response that's going to happen, except these huge convoys of people are going to keep coming in and taking my neighbors away. And when other neighbors are coming to respond to that, then they're going to also be brutalized. I couldn't have imagined that 6 months ago, that would be happening almost every day on my block.
It looks like a war zone every time I'm on social media and seeing footage, or some news story shows footage. It absolutely looks like a war zone, and it's not what I would expect to see.
Well, a war zone is even different. It's like a war zone. It's like you have like certain areas of town that are being targeted. This is like so specific. It's like block by block or house by house. And then they go away and you're supposed to go back to your life as normal. This is, I think, another one of these like disorienting things. Like, they're like, why would this dude go to the riot with a gun? And it's like, dude wasn't at a riot. It was a freaking donut shop that he was in front of walking around. That's not a riot. Is the guy inside of the donut shop that's videotaping, is he at a riot? Like, where's the riot? The riot isn't until all of these ICE vehicles show up and like pin people in and start pushing pedestrians, and other people respond, are like, hey, you can't do that. Like, we don't want you here. Get out of here. Like, it doesn't matter where they park. Everybody's going to be like, what are you doing? Why are you here? And why are you in this tactical gear? And why are you behaving in this way? And why are you terrorizing everyone around you? Like, that is what's happening. It's not like there is a place where there's like this ongoing insurgency happening or something like that. It's like the conditions are that they can come and create that at any corner, in front of any house, at any time, for any reason. Whether they have a targeted person or not, they can do it for the feeling that a car is following them, or that somebody's videotaping them, or, it's not even like about immigration enforcement anymore. Sure, like maybe they're still trying to get to people who are at risk for detention, but like that is not the majority of like what the interactions are. I don't even see the facade of that in so many of the ones that I have stumbled across.
Do you think it's just because they're aimless and they're being motivated by creating a shocking situation because there's a sense of power in that, the destabilization attached to that? Do you think that like because of the pushback that they've experienced in some of the neighborhoods, like they're doing less of the targeted just following through on the paperwork that they've got for specific individuals? Like, does it seem like a tit for tat type thing? You might have to speculate to answer that, so you don't have to if you don't want to, but like...
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know. I don't pretend to know what the actual motivation is. I cannot understand. I mean, it's not like I want to give advice on how to do immigration enforcement, but certainly if that was your goal, you would not behave the way that the agents are behaving, or like even just like the tactical strategy that they're using. Are they here to terrorize us? Are they here to brutalize us? There's definitely no indication that, hey, your community and your safety is really important, and we're here to make sure that you feel safe and that you feel safer because of the interactions that we're here to like carry out. There is none of that happening. And there's sometimes the facade of that in like policing that I have seen in the community where it's like, hey, we're here to keep you safe. We're here to, we're the helpers and, like we keep peace or whatever. There's nothing, there's not even like any kind of indication of that. We understand that you have been terrorized by the immigration status in your community, and we're here to help solve that. That is not the premise at all. I don't think anyone would suggest that that's like what's happening here. I don't even think they would. Whatever.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and you're hearing our interview with Donna Mae, a nurse in Minneapolis, talking about community resistance to Border Patrol and ICE attacks on neighbors. In your opinion, like how has the city and the state, how have they reacted to the murders and the terrorizing of the population of Minneapolis and surrounding areas? Like, have the police been working with ICE? Because it kind of seems like from the interviews that I've seen or the stories that I've seen or the videos, like it doesn't look like they've really been on site. I'm sure they've been doing some back-end support, but has there been tension that you've seen between them, or does it just seem like MPD is just like sitting aside?
Yeah, I happened to be just a couple blocks from where Alex was shot when he was shot. And, was in my vehicle and then was parked to watch. I actually didn't know that it was gunshots. I heard the sound. I didn't know that someone had been shot, and I certainly didn't know that someone had been murdered. But I watched as, like at first it's like these 6 or 8 vehicles that are just there because they travel in these like big clusters. And kind of strategically, it's like 1 or 2 will show up. And then as soon as they're there, like 4 to 6 more come and just kind of shut down the area all around it. So that's already happened by the time that the shots are fired. And then from my vantage point, just like up the street, then you see within minutes, 12 more, and then 4 more, and then another 20 more before then fire came and they blocked off one of the streets. And then, eventually some of the squads came, police came. They started creating a perimeter, they put the crime scene tape up. And from what I understand then, because I couldn't understand why they came and then not long after they came, they left. But from what I understand now is that the Border Patrol said, you can't be here, you don't have a warrant. And so police had to leave. At some point, the ambulance came out and was followed by 9 ICE vehicles. And I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, why is this emergency vehicle leaving with all of these law enforcement around it, like not even law enforcement, the immigration people around it. And like at that time, I think there was still one Minneapolis police officer. I was like, why is that happening? Like, why are you letting this happen? Like, what is going on? I think then, it wasn't much longer before state troopers came and, you kind of like watched 60 of them walk up the street, walk kind of through the crowd of observers and people that were there. And then they got to the line and turned around back on the observers. And it was like very stark to watch that happen because it's like, well, who are you protecting? But I mean, also like the Border Patrol people that were there, they have no training to do any kind of like crowd control. Or by that time, as more and more observers came, all they have again is you need to move, get the back. We're going to spray you. We're going to tear gas you. And like they'd already done that by the time the state troopers came. They'd done that by the time Minneapolis Police Department came. Are they working together? I mean, it does not seem like any of those agencies could be in a position to stand with observers or like the residents or to say like this needs to stop in our community. And I think there's a ton of political reasons why that is. Yeah, I mean, again, like maybe that's a little bit speculative or maybe that's even giving them too much credit. I am so impressed with my city council person, Jason Chavez, who is in the community, on the scene, on the block. He's there when ICE shows up. He's getting the calls from the residents. He's responding. He's part of the mobilization. He's embedded. He knows where they've been on the blocks and who's been affected, and he's following up. I have not seen that in any way from the mayor. The mayor's on this like frickin' press tour. Who knows wherever the heck he is, what his influences are, or what his agenda is in this. It just seems so nefarious. Similarly, I haven't seen the governor on my streets. Maybe he has visited. I have seen my representatives. I mean, I feel really good about our like local and state reps. Ilhan Omar was here today after the week that she had, being in community and showing up and coming and saying like, I know that you all are being impacted. I'm I'm here with you. Yeah, but there is an absence of that as well from politicians or, like our local government.
When there have been moments of brutality by Border Patrol, by police, have they been allowing medical professionals through? Have they been blocking like ambulances, that sort of stuff? Because I remember with Renée Good, as I understood, paramedics were blocked from actually coming to the scene for at least 10 minutes, if not longer.
Yeah, and I can look at the timestamps but it was a long time before EMS came, and I have no idea how they would have gotten to the place where Alex had died because there were so many ICE vehicles that were clogging that entire street. And again, I don't think it's by design. I think it's by just the incompetence that it's like no one is even considering, because they're trained to be in battle. They aren't trained to do any kind of like rescue or anything like that. So yeah, if you create a problem, you just flood it with more vehicles and more force. There's no one there that's being like, oh, we're going to need to get an ambulance through this. How are we going to do that? And then complete hostility with anyone that is in the crowd who may have any kind of medical background. And I think in both situations, there were people who, like identified themselves as medical professionals and were not allowed access. And I think one of the reports from Alex is that they were counting bullet holes on him rather than like administering any kind of first aid. I mean, that's just so dark.
With 15,000 active duty military of the Army's 11th Airborne Division based in Alaska on standby from the Pentagon at least a couple of days ago, this might have changed, but Governor Walz also was mobilizing the Minnesota National Guard in response to the rhetoric about the Insurrection Act. Like, it sounded like was mustering like the National Guard in order to do crowd control with them, as opposed to keeping the streets safe from the federal agents that were going around terrorizing people. Have you seen any of military deployment in the streets, or did they kind of like ramp it up and then hold off to see what happens next?
I mean, there was definitely deployment the day that Alex was shot. Yeah, I don't actually know the difference between like when you call in state troopers. State troopers were the ones that seemed to be like, they had to have been like in a place close by, ready to go. And I do understand that state troopers have a different scope than what National Guard has. But I think National Guard was there within, like 2 hours as well. And National Guard comes in much more militarized like vehicles. And I mean, I was in such a weird kind of the center of it. So I don't actually know what the vehicles that state troopers came in. And I know that they had to have been parked far away because I didn't see any of their vehicles because I was inside of this place where more ICE vehicles had, like it was probably a 6-block, maybe 9-block area that within 5 minutes was totally blocked off by anybody. They got all of the vehicles that were like driving through out of there, and then the people were left that were inside, and more people came to be witnesses. So then 20 minutes in, none of those vehicles could get inside of that zone that the ICE had already created. I don't know when or how then the National Guard tanks got in, but I think from the footage that I've seen, eventually they were, like a closer in. But then by nightfall, I think National Guard had created a perimeter that was like several blocks out. It was like, I want to say it was like a mile or a mile and a half wide in all the directions. And in order to go in or out of there, they weren't like stopping people, but they must have been collecting all the information about license plates and everything of anyone that was going in or out of that area. And again, like, is that to keep people safe, or is that for increased surveillance? Or certainly like the Border Patrol was not going to stop because National Guard was telling them that there was a perimeter created. And then by the time nightfall came, it was just folks around Alex Pretti's like memorial that were there. It's so disorienting. And I think then when you like compare it to a battlefield, it's like, no, the expectation is these huge conflicts between, all of these just militarized agents, common pedestrians, this huge battle, and then it's just supposed to go back to life as it was.
Yeah, I guess it's more of like an occupation or a counterinsurgency than it is a battle. So a lot of people are going out in their neighborhood when they hear ISIS around. People are whistling, people are joining in to whistle and videotape and bear witness at least to these instances. And I've heard that ICE has been visiting people later who were at sites of protest or witnessing or videotaping or whatever, going to their houses and just sort of like saying, hi, we know where you live. Someone speculated that it's like cars were getting marked with pepper balls that have a dye in them, that like a UV dye, so that they could get recognized later, or they were just noting people's license plates. Like, is that a thing that you've seen in the neighborhood where people are getting door knocks because they've been out with whistles?
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard for me where I live because there's so much ice and they're just creeping around and intimidating everyone. They'll be in the alley and they'll point at the house or whatever. But yes, I know several people who have been either like doing the driving, and notifying people when ICE is coming into the neighborhood, or following an ICE agent after one of these like kind of like brutality things, and the ICE agent will literally drive them back to their house. Like they must do like a plate search or whatever, and then bring someone back to their home. Yeah, I know several people who have had that happen. I imagine that because my car was inside of that perimeter, it's very much in the database or whatever, the register. I'm sure that, yeah, I also know, like if they're using the technology, and I can't remember what it's called offhand, but like, I live within a block of, or, a couple blocks of where Renée was murdered.
Like flock cameras or what?
Yeah. And so if they're like drawing that perimeter of like we want to know every vehicle and every phone that goes in and out of that area for the next, week or whatever, so that we can keep track of that. I mean, that's like everyone on my block, we live here, so of course we're going to come in and out of there. Does that make us like, I don't know what they're trying to demonstrate by that, but it's very intimidating, and it's, that's a cause for concern for a lot of my neighbors. It's just the heightened surveillance, helicopters, drones, and then the agents that are coming around. That oftentimes, like inside of a vehicle, there will be like 3 or 4 agents, and then someone that has that like facial recognition camera, and they're taking pictures of different people as they're driving through or things like that. It's very much like, and that has nothing to do, again, with immigration enforcement.
I've read an article earlier saying that ICE was planning on descending on Springfield, Ohio, for instance, and attacking the Somali communities there, and I'm sure whatever other people they can bully in the area. I know that like ICE was active in North Carolina not that long ago, before like focusing on Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham, before going down to New Orleans. They've been in Memphis, they've been in Chicago, they've been in all sorts of cities around the country. And I wonder if, because the resistance that I have seen coming out of Minneapolis has been so strong and so inspirational for a lot of people, but also I am sure it has been absolutely like amazingly tiring, just with the amount of violence, with the numbers of officers around blocking streets, harassing people, threatening people, kidnapping your neighbors, that it's been stupid tiring. But I wonder like if you have any sort of insights or any sort of like suggestions for folks in communities where ICE might show up in these kind of numbers, to sort of give some sort of clues.
Yeah, my perspective is probably shaped, again, like by working in homeless services for so long. So many times somebody needs like a ride, or needs $10, or needs to like have this really specific thing. And there's not an agency or like a way in which they can get that need met in the moment. And I think in community, we also think, oh, that's up to the experts, that's up to the system. Like we have a service provider. I'm not the right best person to meet that need, give that ride, like resolve that. It is very different what's happening here. I think people still feel like I'm not the right person to give this person I've never met a ride to work tomorrow, but I'm the only person that's going to, so I'm going to do it anyways. And that changes something, I think, when people are able to just say, there's a need and I'm going to meet it, even though I don't feel like I'm the right best person. Even like somebody was joking the other day when we were like at one of these like meetings with my neighbors, we were just like all getting together, and he was laughing. He was like, yeah, at some point someone was like, you should be a block captain. And I was like, I'm not the block captain. And then I went back home and I thought, well, block captain's just an imaginary thing. We're just making this up. I could be a block captain. Who knows? And it's just these ideas of like whether or not we feel like the right best person to do the next thing, and how many times I'm seeing neighbors that I wouldn't have expected that from doing the next thing, being present, showing up for one another, building out these systems of mutual aid, figuring out how to really take care of the people on our block is going to take care of the people on the next blocks. And then how do we, 3 weeks ago, it was fine for me to go to the food bank and bring it directly to somebody that needed it. But now they're following cars from the food bank because they think that they're going to bring them to like vulnerable families. So how are we getting what needs to get to the blocks with only cars that usually go to the block or that live on the block? Those are all strategies that people are figuring out in real time to just be responsive. And it does mean that people are doing things that they wouldn't have thought of doing or wouldn't have expected doing or don't feel like they're the right person to do it. That's what feels like the biggest mobilization or the biggest shift here in Minneapolis. I think that probably what we saw in 2020 as far as like the mutual aid and the response when George Floyd was murdered, but there is so many people showing up to so many actions. There is not the kind of like damage to the city. There was a lot of that in 2020. We, like some of the places that I live really close to, like burned to the ground. There isn't that happening at all. 50,000 people came downtown Minneapolis and walked in the freezing cold. There wasn't damage that was done. There wasn't violence that happened. Like that's amazing. That's kind of unheard of. And I think that also is just like the spirit of like people are showing up to do the next thing. And there is just a lot of agreement that it should not be happening the way that it's happening right now. And even though our little makeshift systems are not perfect, they're working and they're responsive and they're nimble. And there's not, the kind of leadership that I think we're accustomed to where there's like a handbook and a protocol and here's the strategy and here are all of the roles. It's so moment to moment and relationship based that is really profound. I have really benefited in my life working with people who sleep outside to see the way in which communities have to be nimble, have to be responsive, resourceful. There's so much learning that happens in watching communities that are constantly under strike like that respond to weather changes, respond to being together in community. And there's so many lessons in that I think are coming through to the larger community now. Yeah, as a nurse, we think a lot about like what's the best practice, like what's the evidence-based best practice, like that's what we work out of. There's no best practice here. There's no evidence-based best practice. There's no handbook for this. And so it is like only able to move at the speed of like, who am I in relationship to? What is the trust I have? And also like, what is my own relationship to risk and what I want to do? And it is surprising and inspiring to see how many people are willing to be like, I will go outside and I will blow my whistle. I will stop and I will blow my horn. I will get out and I will say, I'm going to watch you. I will videotape. I will, put myself here to be a witness to this. And also, oftentimes that's preventing an abduction from happening, whether or not that's always preventing violence from happening or brutality happening for those observers. And then there's people who are just hustling, like giving rides, bringing food, checking in on families, building health systems that are more robust and responsive, building out, I don't know, even just like what's coming around right now is like, how do we get people packages at home so that they can have inspirational things to do, coloring books, like how are people going to experience joy during this time? Like that's also important to just be able to like show up in community and do that. And I don't know, I'm not trying to bypass the brutality, but it's also remarkable to see people just returning to connection and returning to pleasure and joy and things that people are like, yeah, it's not enough to just bring bread. We also have to like check in on people and see how they're doing and if they're doing okay.
Yeah. No, that's really well put.
I mean, I will say that I hesitate to give too many specifics because there's so much, like the agents are trying to get into more information, like there are people posing as people that live on my block at the end of the block to be like, oh yeah, and how are you communicating? Are you using Signal?
Oh,
like,
for
tell
sure.
me about Signal. Like, how do you get into that? And I'm like, so where are you from again?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm from like up by Lake Harriet. Okay, so you're from Lake Harriet and you just decided to come and stand on this block corner and now you're asking me about Signal? Like, that's like so nefarious. There's people who are coming to the school patrols and they wear the vest because they've been watching which vest they wear and then come in to pretend like they're like part of the school patrol. Like that's, again, has nothing to do with immigration enforcement. That is creepy surveillance. And, like I don't want everyone to know how we are building out communication plans and how we are connecting block to block and how we coordinate between driving patrols and foot patrols and all those kind of things. Like, and that's all going to have to be hyper-local anyways. It's all going to have to be neighborhood by neighborhood and block by block, wherever it is. And yeah, I think it actually will do people a disservice to be like, we have to replicate what Minneapolis did. Like, I think of that when I think of, being part of the street medicine community. It's like, I know that my skills here in Minneapolis cannot translate if I would go to Philadelphia next week and try to be an outreach nurse. Some of that's about relationships, but so much of that is about the landscape and how information moves and how, it's so hyper-local.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and you're hearing our interview with Donna Mae, a nurse in Minneapolis, talking about community resistance to Border Patrol and ICE attacks on neighbors. I think that with people having the expectation that this sort of thing is going to be happening in their community, and to be clear, I do agree that it's already happening in everyone's community. Police violence, violence to houseless folks, violence to people that are being marginalized by the system in any number of different ways is already happening, and the opportunities there to get involved, to build these relationships, as difficult as it can be. And then when stuff flares up and is exacerbated, hopefully you have those relationships and those trusts to be able to build off of, to figure out what the next piece has to be to respond to what's happening in front of you, right?
Absolutely. And I will say that when this brutality comes to someone's block, there is going to be a different reaction, because you cannot see this happen and not have the human, well, I guess you can, because some people are there. The agents are there, and I'm like, how are you even doing this? What is actually happening? What do you think you're doing here? It is oftentimes a conversation I'm trying to have. But, for my neighbors, you can't see this little kid get ripped away and not be like, that can't happen again. What are we going to do about it? There's not another agency. There's not an institution. The police aren't coming. The city's not coming. If we really can prevent it, we will keep preventing it. We'll go out and blow our whistles, and we'll be out on the block when we can be, to make sure this isn't happening. I do think that having such a high level of brutality here, maybe it will change, maybe it'll shift and it will be less brutal, but I kind of doubt that. And once you have that, and it is the case where it's happening so often on my block that you can't not be thinking about it, and you can't not be ready for it. And that's the same in the area that I work in too. It's just so consistent. That it also creates that absurdity of are you seeking this out? Do I want to intervene with ICE? Am I going to seek out information on how to do that? It's it's going to happen. It's going to happen on my block. It's going to happen to my neighbors. Whether I'm seeking it out or not, I'm going to be running into it. I don't know if I'm describing that well, but thinking about communities that this is going to come to, it's when you have all of these unmarked cars start pulling up to the school and taking parents away during school drop off, you are not going to want any kid to see that. You're not going to want any community member to have to witness that again. You're going to figure out how to patrol or create a way in which that can't be happening by the school. And then you're going to do that. That can't be happening at the grocery store. It can't be happening here. Where are the lines to that? And I do think Minneapolis, it's the first wave of border control was we can go anywhere we want. We can take that guy out in Walmart. We can take the kids out in front of, in the Target entrance. We can take people out on their way into preschool. We can do whatever we want. That kind of immunity also is just so impossible to reckon with, that people will mobilize and people will do that. I do think that's the case. And I think it will be those individual moments of somebody being I'm not the best person to do this, but I'm the only person to do it right now. So I will blah, 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 insert whatever mutual aid or mobilization of resources that, you put after that.
I mean, Minneapolis is getting hit very hard, has been for, as you said, almost 60 days. I mean, knowing that this is also happening to varying degrees in other places around the country, ICE is in every community, even if they're not mobilizing in these numbers and with this visible brutality. Are there ways that people in the listening audience can offer support to folks in Minneapolis in ways that'll get redistributed back into the community and sort of alleviate a little bit of the pressure? Are there any groups that you would suggest people keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I guess generally I feel I'm always wanting to promote people investing in harm reduction organizations because I feel like that's something that, regardless of what kind of state violence or what kind of surveillance or what kind of policing comes in, those are some of the folks that are most impacted. But in general, I mean, I don't know, organize a national a strike. I mean, I think it really is like the solidarity of like, it is not going to impact until there's like a big economic impact and until industry is impacted. And I think that that's some of the political landscape, but some of just like the ways in which our gears have been working for a long time, like well past this administration for sure.
How did you, like, there was a call for a general strike a couple of days ago. Did many people stay home who wouldn't have stayed home otherwise?
The amount of people who showed up that day in the cold to march in downtown Minneapolis was enormous, like 50,000 people. A lot of things were not open. Many businesses were totally closed. I know there was like, you know, as always, there's like various levels of support of like, we're closing our whole business, or we're encouraging people not to come to work, or we're allowing people not to come to work. I feel like in anywhere people were working, there was the most amount of leniency possible in those situations. And people showed up in mass to walk the streets together. I guess I don't know how economically like that changed things or what that did. I just know that it was also a very galvanizing moment for so many people, and for so many people to come together and to be together in that way was really powerful. But like, there's like something in it that is way beyond words to see. And these are neighbors who had been out and who have been mobilized and who have been doing this and who were like making decisions about who was going to stay back to be on the block because we knew ICE was going to be coming during that time. You know, these are like relationships where people are like, so much is at stake and we need to be there and we need to be here. Like, those were the conversations that I was having that day. And working with vulnerable people, it's like, who's going to be able to check in on the folks who are sleeping outside and like outside in this cold weather, while as many of us are downtown as we can. And for those of us who need to be in our blocks where ICE is like most prevalent, like that's the kind of level of planning that people are doing with one another of like, well, I'm going to go out of town next weekend. Are you going to be around? Maybe we shouldn't go out of town the same weekend. Like, neighbors don't do that. You know, like that's unheard of, but we want to make sure there's going to be enough people to like keep us safe. Yeah, it's very different. And I don't know how that relates in my mind to the general strike, but there's something about it that was so profound that day. Yeah, and the way that people are orienting to one another and orienting to a broader sense of safety and not just personal convenience. Or I think that's another one of the lessons right now in this, is that as someone who I think has a lot of critique of people who confuse discomfort with being unsafe, I see a lot of that shifting where people are willing to do more things that are uncomfortable and recognize that they actually are not unsafe in doing something that's uncomfortable, and seeing that at a larger scale than what I could have imagined, you know, several months ago.
Were there any things that I didn't ask about that you think that you want to note or touch on?
I think I'm still in this is actively happening and I can't imagine. I couldn't have conceived of this enough to be able to make large connections with something that happened 5 years ago, or kind of like what I know to be true of just ongoing in the community about state violence, or even things that I've known about Border Patrol, or things that I've known about immigration, customs enforcement, you know, like these things that have been a part of the landscape of things for a long time. There's something about the way that it is here actually on the ground that is so inconceivable that makes it hard for me to be like, wait, this is actually of that. And it is maybe also really clear then how this is part of larger, like other, I'm thinking of like things that are happening in Gaza, things that are happening, you know, like in the world politics of things that are like, oh, this is what this looks like, and this is how it is, and this is what it really means to be in a place where such brutality is happening. And how could that be in the place that I live in my lifetime? Yeah, that makes it harder for me to be like kind of like in conversation about what this means for policy, or what this means in like in the political realm. But there's something very galvanizing about it too, to be like, this is just a different side of the same coin.
Well, Donna Mae, thank you very much for taking the time to have the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for having me, and thank you for lifting up the questions that you did and being in the conversation. I think it is like something that we're going to be unpacking for a long time. So I'm curious what I would say 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now about this moment. I know that I only know what I can just like hold in my body and my nervous system at this time. So appreciate that.
This is The Final Straw Radio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. Programming support is brought to you by Firestorm Books. Located at 1022 Haywood Road in West Asheville, Firestorm is a bookstore and social movement space owned by its workers, in operation since 2008. Their event calendar and complete catalog of books can be found online at firestorm.coop.